Camelot is a famous tale, with a lot of lore centering around King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. But what is King Arthur really famous for? That's right, it's being a waifu, and being all kinds of waifus at once. And even Mordred, King Arthur's sworn enemy, is a waifu. King Arthur Knight's Tale puts a bit of a spin on the lore. What if King Arthur and Mordred were guys? No, I know. Bear with me here. I know it may be blasphemy, but that's what we end up with in this game. You play with the main character Mordred, and your only goal is to kill Arthur to bring peace to the world of Avalon, which is some weird post-apocalyptic world that you get dragged into. You're put into turn-based combat with tiles on the map, with an AP limit and combat mechanics probably most similar to the XCOM games. You can recruit other knights and put them into your round table, as well as build up your base, aka Camelot, to give you an edge in battle. There's a lot of interesting mechanics, and for this video, I want to share my thoughts and review for this game, and whether or not it's worth playing. The story in this game is only slightly better than XCOM's non-existent story. At least in King Arthur, you get direction on what to do, though it's not much better. The summary of the story is literally just killing King Arthur, with everything along the way being a side story or subplot to get there. The game kind of forces you to complete side missions though, because you need more XP and levels to complete the main missions, and then you have to kill multiple versions of King Arthur until you finish. I thought there was a bit of potential here since there was half a conspiracy ongoing, but nothing really came out of it. Mordred being a powerful character was cool too, but we didn't really get any insight or twists as to why he betrayed the Round Table. Shit story, but it's something. Choices don't really matter either, but at least there's a little bit of voice acting in cutscenes, as well as random monologue lines for every character, though it gets old pretty quickly. It's something at least, and at least Mordred's voice acting is pretty damn good. Before I even get to the basic gameplay, I just want to talk about the visuals of the game. The game has a dark theme, and it kinda gives a post-apocalyptic vibe with a lot of dead areas, which suits it since there are a lot of undead and other monster enemies. The visuals work for it for the most part, but there are some issues. On most maps, you can move around and collect random loot lying on the ground. Sometimes you can even find lore that provides more information about the mission. The problem is, the color of this loot is actually really hard to see in contrast to the environment. It's not marked on the map either. A lot of games don't necessarily show loot on the minimap, but it better be visible as hell. I mean, just look at this. I feel like I had to squint at every part of the map just to find loot. And on big maps, it was fucking hell, because I had to spend minutes watching Team Mordred slowly walk through the map while I looked for slightly bright outlines instead of enjoying the tactical aspect of the game. It's a UI issue, but because of the size of the maps, it became important enough to matter. Also, I need to highlight one of the worst parts of the game, the loading times. I don't know what kind of fuckery the devs did with this, but the loading times in this game are actually horrendous. At least more than a minute long, to the point that I'm tempted to watch a YouTube video just to wait for it to load. I have a pretty good PC by the way, and I've never encountered such long loading times in any other game I've played. Even the side missions have larger maps that also require long loading times. Plus, on larger maps, it's unsurprising for the frames to drop as well, which leads to a really frustrating experience. Maybe it's just me, but do let me know if those of you who have also played this game encountered the same issue. King Arthur Knight's Tale presents an interesting gameplay loop. You have turn-based combat, and you have to clear the map by beating certain enemies. At first glance, it's pretty fun. You have 6 classes to choose from, and you can recruit knights to use in a party of 4 while clearing the maps. The thing is, as I played more and more, I just felt more frustrated and bored. To the point that by the middle of the game, I was honestly sick and tired of the whole thing. I always wanted to finish. I just wanted to quit. I only finished it so I could give a full and proper review by the end of it. For this part, I'm going to talk about the things that pissed me off and how these things just added up and made for a worse experience overall. Of course, I'll also talk about some of the better things I've encountered in the game. First, the HP and Vitality mechanic. In this game, you have 2 health bars, one for HP and the second one for Vitality. If you lose HP, it gets regained after a mission ends. But any damage to Vitality is permanent, and that means it has to be healed separately at the cost of resources and time. If you take too much Vitality damage, you might even get injuries, which are permanent debuffs, which also have to be healed separately from regular Vitality points. On its own, this mechanic doesn't seem too bad, You see this often in games like XCOM, or maybe some other genre of game like Darkest Dungeon, where units are replaceable and probably should be replaced on a regular basis. The problem is, you don't get a lot of replacements in this game. The number of active heroes at any one time is limited, with 12 max, and the pacing of the game means you won't get a lot of possible replacements until midway through the game. And if there are any knights that you dismiss to make way for new knights, well, goodbye forever. Plus, any knights with vitality damage or injuries, and injuries have to be healed in 2 separate locations, and it leads to another major issue in the game: time. There are in fact a limited number of missions in the game, so there's no easy way to grind or to make time pass quickly. If a unit is being healed, they're out of commission for at least 1 mission, and at least 2 missions if they're both injured and vitality damaged. Considering that you have limited replacements and you have a limited number of missions, you can get set back pretty hard. Not to mention, any knight being healed cannot get XP at all, so they could end up being behind the main mission level if they get hurt too badly or too often. It's not the end of the world if you're playing on normal, but on hard and very hard, your run can go wrong very fast. Catching up is the same way. There's no place to grind outside of a passive XP building, but even that has a limit of 4, so it's difficult for other knights to catch up in terms of level. There are also a limited number of missions, so if you need time to pass real quick because your main team got injured in a mission and you need them for a main mission, well, you're fucked. Your only option at that point is to hope that you can clear the mission with less health or to reload to an earlier save and not lose vitality inside missions. Decisions made feel more final, and there's much less room for mistakes because of it. Some might not consider this an issue, and might even consider it as a benefit. But for a game like this, with ridiculous loading times and basically very little strategy variation, I felt pretty terrible for making mistakes. The issue on its own is not the worst. There's ways to justify it, you can see this mechanic in other games. But for me, it's the start of a snowball effect, which leads to the next issue: trash mobs. Honestly, the enemy design's pretty cool. Aside from the undead called Lost Ones, you have a new batch of enemies after every act in the game. There are even cool boss enemies that have great designs and skills to match, forcing you to play around them and make sure your positioning is done well. But imagine this, you load up the mission, and you're excited, because you know that there's going to be a cool boss waiting for you at the end of this map based on the mission summary. And you fight Trash Mob Encounter number 1. And then Trash Mob Encounter number 2. And then number 3. All the way to number 7. And on the same fucking map. Plus, Trash Mob Encounters have a minimum of at least 6 enemies, and can go all the way until 15 enemies or more later in the game. At this point, is there any point to the boss being cool anymore? Honestly, I felt fucking insulted having to fight the exact same group of enemies or trash mobs over and over again. Any admiration I had for enemy design just went down the drain. It was brainless, there was no point in using strategy since you can't switch characters, and I felt like it was an insult to my intelligence, because the only point of these trash mobs was to whittle down your HP and vitality and force you to rest, which leads to the issue I mentioned earlier on recovery. The only redeeming factor was that some trash fights could allow positioning to help give an advantage, but it only applied to very few fights. Note that I've played XCOM before, but I was never really able to get into it because there was no story. But I do love other tactical games like Fire Emblem or Tactics Ogre. One of the main reasons fights can be enjoyable in these games is that because there is meaning to fights. Some kind of strategy waiting to be uncovered on each mission, or maybe some kind of trick or mechanic that can be used. One of the most important pillars in the game usually relates to the environment, and unfortunately there's not much of that in King Arthur. XCOM focuses on positioning and taking cover, Fire Emblem has mechanics like elevation, while King Arthur has kill this unit first? Stall? I don't fucking know. I felt almost no death in the trash fights of King Arthur, and it's honestly a wasted opportunity. At most, they have stuff like lingering damage areas that were basically useless, and the use of cover, which is also useless because enemies could easily reposition around the tiny amount of cover you had in most encounters. Plus the fact that most dangerous enemies were melee units anyways. The only good thing they had that there was a decent number of cool skills that could be used, but even that was limited because you can only have 4 party members max. If they cut down on the trash mobs and focused more on implementing useful mechanics, it would have been a shorter game, but I think it would have been a more fulfilling one. But instead, it's like getting told that the anime your friend is recommending is amazing, but you have to watch 2 seasons of terrible episodes before it gets good. If people want to grind with trash mobs, they can do it on the roguelike mode instead of the main campaign. But for me, it's a hard pass. Next, let's talk about class and character variation. Each character has a class, and each character has their own variations of skills in each class, but the variation could be either small or big. To be honest, the character variation across classes is pretty decent for the most part. Different arcanists have the most variation, which is the coolest part for me since you have a lot of cool spellcasters. Some spellcasters focus on fire, others focus on ice, while others focus on lightning. It was very cool. Most of the other classes had their own variations, probably except for marksmen. I don't know why they weren't able to think of cool stuff for archers, but there's barely any variation for marksmen. And they don't feel useful on harder difficulties since they lack a lot of AoE in a game with a bajillion trash bombs. Otherwise, the other characters and classes all have cool and unique abilities. Unfortunately, there's a big limitation in that you only have 4 members in the party, and you can only have 12 knights total. It doesn't really let me feel like I can try out whatever characters I want, and catching up characters to the current level can be difficult if you get injured often. So we have all these mechanics that only slightly make the game worse. But what happens when you put them all together? You get extremely repetitive fights where you can't make mistakes on higher difficulties. To be honest, I'm kinda biased since I completed the game on the hardest difficulty, which is very hard. So if you want to have a better experience, I think you should definitely play it on normal or hard. Regardless, it's still extremely repetitive and grindy, mostly because of the ridiculous number of trash mobs and the limitation on the number of available knights. I just wish they had deeper mechanics or something more interactable with the environment to make the fights more interesting. While the game doesn't focus heavily on story, there are at least a lot of characters. And then we have our main character. Just look at Mordred. Mordred is the ultimate cool anti-hero main character anyone can ask for. Just listen to that gravelly voice.
It's quite a crowd.
You know very well that diplomacy was never my strong suit.
What does this mean? It means that Mordred is what every beta isekai protagonist could ever hope to be. Alas, we don't get enough of Mordred and the rest of the cast. At most, we get a few lines of monologue and 1 or 2 missions where knights are actually important before they get thrown to the background gutter. If they weren't gonna put effort into the background characters, I was hoping they would at least put more effort into Mordred. I wanted more voice lines of Mordred. I wanted more action of Mordred. I just wanted more Mordred. Ah, my eyes! Anyways, because the character interactions were hella weak, I was just hoping they would put more emphasis onto the main character. It's unfortunate since Mordred had the makings of the start of a good story. Overall, I feel like there was some potential in the initial gameplay of King Arthur. It was fun at first, but I personally felt disappointed midway through the game, all the way to the end. And it's just unfortunate. Would I recommend this game to anyone else? Honestly, I'm kinda leaning towards no. It feels like it wanted to take certain mechanics from different games, but just lacked in depth compared to most of them. If you want pure tactical range combat, you can just play XCOM and play with positioning there. If you want a mix of story, turn-based combat, and some deeper mechanics to play with, you can play games like Fire Emblem, Triangle Strategy, or maybe even Tactics Ogre. The main niche that I see this game filling is some kind of slightly different flavor from XCOM if you're already bored with that game. Otherwise, I feel like it's hard for me to recommend it over some of the other turn-based strategy games I've played before. Maybe it's just because I didn't really like XCOM, so I couldn't get myself to really love this game. But what did you think? Agree, disagree? Just let me know in the comments below.